If you're trying to figure out if you should pay yourself more or if you should reinvest your profits in the business, then I'm going to walk you through a few steps and a few things you want to think about to help you make a plan to figure out when to reinvest in the business and when to pay yourself more. So this is not from a tax advantage standpoint. This is not from a accounting or financial standpoint. This is from a making smart business decisions standpoint. And when it comes to retained earnings or profit that you are keeping, paying it to yourself or reinvesting in the business, there's a few guidelines you may want to consider. So the first is, how much should you actually have in retained earnings in your operating expenses and your business savings account? However that money is flowing into the business, how should you be using that? And at what point should you reinvest it? I still see this. A lot of businesses are operating on a month to month basis. And when you think about this, this is really irresponsible from a business standpoint, especially if you have employees. And not only is it, in my opinion, irresponsible, it's also really stressful. And it makes it so that if you're going month to month, if you are just barely making ends meet in the business, then the problem is that you're going to make decisions differently, really for the wrong purposes, that may be good for you in the short term, but not good for you and the business in the long term. We've all probably heard the story about killing the goose that lays the golden egg. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of business owners treat their business itself and the finances in their business. They don't prioritize and do what's best for the business, the goose, right? That's laying the golden egg, that's producing the revenue that their families, and their employees or contractors' families are being provided for. So to me, the first thing is adjusting your mindset about the business and doing what's in the best interest for the business, even if that means for a temporary amount of time, not always doing what's in your immediate best interest, but aligning your best interest and the best interest of the company, both on more of a long-term basis. And the first way that you do this is by setting aside revenue and money, both on the personal side and on the business side. When I've been in this situation in the past, the second thing that I do is, first, I may work extra in the business, doing whatever I'm doing that generates income and revenue. And my first objective with that is to get some money set aside personally. Ideally, I'm looking at 3 to 6 months of expenses minimum sitting in my personal account. So I may be taking a salary that covers some of my bills and my expenses, but then I'm also looking to build up a minimum of a 6-month personal reserve account with that. I may talk to my CPA and I may take that in the form of a bonus or whatever that is, but that's the first step, right? Because if you're worried about how you're going to make ends meet, that's going to impact how you treat the business. So the first thing I want to do is I want to, one, change my mindset like we just talked about, but two, I want to set that money aside personally. And that's the minimum rule of thumb that I look at. What I do is, if my 6-month reserve is depleted for any reason, emergency, whatever that is, I then shift my focus to doing things, working more in the business, putting in extra hours, putting in extra time, taking an extra contract, whatever that may be, and replenishing that reserve. That's my first priority, because if I don't do that, I start to operate differently in the business and I change the way I make decisions. And this is really not the way I want to do it. So after I have that reserve, my second step, the third step is I then start to do basically the same thing for the business. Now, the reason that I just did this with the personal is I'm going to basically look at this as, hey, I now have 6 months in case I make a change, in case something happens, whatever is the case in the business, things don't go as planned, things aren't going as well. And I have time that I've given myself personally. But I also now am trying to do the same thing for the business. So the second thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to make sure that I do the exact same thing for the business. I'm building up a minimum of a 3 to 6 month reserve in my retained earnings in the business. Now, depending on the size of your business, this may be more difficult to do. I'm looking for something that matches expenses. So if I have a company that's doing, let's just, for the simplicity of numbers, let's say the company generates $20,000 per month in revenue. And on average, I have a 50% operating profit margin. Then what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to have, that's $10,000 a month left over. I'd be looking to build up a reserve in retained earnings in an account for the business that's like $60,000, right? That's enough to cover 6 months of expenses if something happened, right? Some catastrophe. But what this does, it allows me to have a cushion. Now, that's the third step. Now, the fourth step is, at what point do we start saying, let's reinvest in the business? Well, before I move into reinvesting in the business, what I want to do is I want to do this fourth thing, which is I want to set aside half a day or a day, and I'm going to, so before I do this, I'm going to take typically half a day to a day, pull my profit and loss statements, pull my balance sheet, pull my financial documents, and I'm going to look at those, and I'm going to look at the profit and loss statement. I'm going to identify areas that I can cut expenses. The reason that I do this is because pretty much no matter what, you're going to have unnecessary expenses that creep into the business, that it just happens. It just happens over time. And the bigger the business, the more expenses that are unnecessary. Maybe a software that you tried and you forgot to cancel it, right? And now you've maybe got $100 a month charge that's coming out. Well, when you look at that over 12 months, that's $1,200, right? That's money that could have gone into your personal account, your employees' bonuses, your account. There's a lot of things like this. On average, at $1 million company, every, let's say, 3 months, I can typically cut out $20,000 to $30,000 a year of unnecessary expenses in just a few hours. This provides me, again, a higher profit margin, meaning that if I move into this stage of reinvesting into the business and growing the business, that I now have more profit margin, which to me becomes more margin that protects me from errors and things that don't go exactly right. So once I cut expenses, I now have more profitability in the company, more that's falling to the bottom line. And I know the numbers, and that tells me exactly what the numbers are so that I can know how much to reinvest in the business. Now, the fifth step, which is reinvesting in the business to grow it so that, one, you can take more personal income, two, the business can have larger operating expenses, which we didn't really talk about too much, but as the business grows, having that 6-month cushion will become harder and harder. But my point is, as the reserves grow, both in your personal and your business, as you know the numbers and the company is now becoming more profitable, you now can go into what I call strategically reinvesting into the business. A lot of times, business owners look at investing into the business to grow it or to scale it as a perpetual function. They're just always doing it. And what ends up happening is, over time, the scaling and the reinvesting creates less profitability, more variables in the business, more things that you don't know if they're working or not working. And again, this creates this cycle of the company becoming less and less profitable because of the fact that you are perpetually trying to grow the business and you're running low on money and personal energy reserves. This makes it so that the scaling efforts and the reinvestment into the business become less effective. So what the best thing I've found to do is to do periods that are very intentional in scaling. So I might say, hey, I'm going to scale and reinvest this amount specifically each month into the business. And I'm going to, before I do it, I'm going to choose where I'm reinvesting. Am I trying to increase ad spend? Am I trying to add salespeople? What specifically am I going to invest this money in? And how much am I going to invest each month with the hope of what return And for how long am I going to do this before I stop, clean up the mess, make sure I've got my personal reserves, make sure I've got the company reserves, cut expenses again, clean up anything that broke while we were scaling, get things operating correctly again for a month or two, and then start reinvesting and growing and scaling the business again. What I've found is that when you scale and reinvest for specific periods, it ends up working better for the business and for you in the long run to be more deliberate in those actions. So those are the 5 steps that I follow to figure out when and how much I should reinvest into the business, when I should be paying myself instead of reinvesting into the business, and the process that I follow to systematically grow, scale, and reinvest in my business. Because a lot of times business owners are just using, we're reinvesting in the business as an excuse for being unprofitable. So that's what we want to avoid. And those are the 5 steps that I follow in my companies to do that. If you like this video and you want to see others like it about growing, scaling, making your company more profitable, I'd love to keep sharing those here. Go ahead and click that subscribe button so you can see more, and I will see you in the next video.